I want to let the text talk for itself, so I'm not going to comment too much on it, but I have to introduce it, I think. I should also thank Dalembert, which I will. His text is called, we gave it the title, The Other Side of the Sea. In French, it's called L'autre face de la mer. And even that comes from le beau dos, which are three words of Creole, which means on the other side of the water. So there's a kind of complication even in the title, and it's nice to evoke Creole too, even though Dalembert is not an author who uses a lot of Creole. Sorry. That book, stock edition, was published in 1998. It was republished in 2005. So there are three parts to this text, as you can see, since it's in front of you. And two of the parts have first-person narrators. One is called Granny, or Granny's story, le récit de Granny, if you will. And the other is Jonas, and Jonas is her grandson. So we already have a kind of unique couple. It's a couple between a grandmother and a grandson. So it's cross-generation, or what? You tell me, meta-generational. You give me the right word. I knew I shouldn't have launched into anything as abstract as that. And the first passage I want to read is called Newbold. And it's Granny's nickname, and I think you'll understand in a few minutes why she has this nickname. So the first section is from Granny's story. And I think we want to say this is Granny at an old age looking back to when she was young, and she's evoking souvenirs of her life in Port-au-Prince, and specifically in Bel Air, if you're familiar with Port-au-Prince. And, of course, that's the place where Dalembert grew up. And so we have a dreamy, nostalgic, obsessed, fascinated Granny, fascinated with the sea. Even she has a kind of combative relationship with the ocean. So maybe all that will come through in what I'm trying to read.
Can you tell us the page?
This is actually right at the first page. You'll see For a Long Time. For a long time, I've dreamt of crossing the ocean like you would step over a puddle of water to see the point where the earth and sky meet, the very roots of the horizon. But the wheel has turned. The other side of life is waiting for me, and I am approaching the shore without regrets. As children, we lived in a neighborhood on the top of the hill, a sort of roof of the city and of the world, from which I could follow the slightest undulation of the ocean before the cities of cardboard, of rusty sheet metal, and of mud came and obstructed the view. Having ignored my parents' ban, rushing down to the docks and dodging in and out between the carriages and the first automobiles was child's play that only became perilous at the thought, too often realized, of getting a beating when I returned. Still out of breath from the climb, no sooner had I planted my feet on the veranda than a hand would grab me and make me pay, in cash, the expenses of my escapade. But while Madame Lorvana was beating me, more by habit than by the conviction of succeeding one day in eradicating my vice, and my body was deceptively twisting so that she would stop taking me for a drum, my mind was flying 1,000 miles away, transported by a nursery rhyme my classmates and I had invented on the playground to defy the rules of adults. It was enough to hum it to yourself mentally, sometimes even audibly, as a provocation to become insensitive to the punishment inflicted and to ready yourself for your next crime. So, I often found myself on the docks, witnessing the departure and the arrival of cargo ships. I was indifferent to the comings and goings of the dock workers sweating and laboring under the sacks of sugar, coffee, and cocoa. My attention was scarcely diverted by the crowd of well-dressed people gathered on the platform. Some were waiting for a relative, for a friend, returning from overseas, some between two sobs or with an impassive countenance suppressing their pain, having come to wish a safe journey to someone close to them. With increasing excitement, I scrutinized the appearance of the first arrivals, although, truth be told, those leaving attracted me just as much. I'd have liked to go up to them and ask them what they had brought back from over there, from the other side of the horizon. Not those external signs of the grand departure, but more than one, but have you seen, flaunted to elicit their neighbors' jealousy. Such trinkets have never interested me. I would have liked for them to recount their experiences, to tell me about the differences encountered, the sweet incomprehension of new languages, the flowers, the trees, the snow, all that rendered over there so beautiful. Those semi-clandestine visits to the docks were like a piggy bank into which I deposited all the riches of my imagination, a treasure gleaned here and there with the excitement and the perseverance of a collector. No piece of information escaped my curiosity, besides the old, half-torn magazines that fell into my hands under circumstances I could no longer explain, and that I devoured with the slow appetite of a man condemned to death. I didn't miss a single geography class. Thus I became the teacher's pet, and they would often let me lead the recitation. Today, it would be difficult for me to say what that other side of the world I dreamt about looked like. There were so many of them, each one always different from the others. It depended on my imagination and on the weather that day. Sometimes the boats resisted the most ferocious hurricanes. Sometimes they slid along like swans in the calmest of seas. From conversations picked up from people around me, a word seized in passing, and my imagination started running at full speed, populating those distant lands with all the whims of a dreamy little girl. What was the Amazon forest of my childhood composed of? What kinds of imaginary beings lived there? The shifting sand dunes of the Sahara, the Promised Land, the great Australia inhabited by myriads of kangaroos? Look, one day when you aren't expecting it, you'll disappear, you yourself, into your eyes-wide-open dreams. That phrase was Hermanos, one of my 4 brothers, twin of Jacques Antonio, younger brother of Diogen and Pétion, jealous of not being able to penetrate into my secret garden. It annoyed him to see me close the 2 panels of the door and leave like that without his knowing where my imagination had taken me. But I didn't pay any attention to it because I liked Hermanos, a lot even. And since only he was denied entrance into my dreams, I continued to embark for even more distant shores that I was the first to marvel at. It's funny. I feel the same strange sensation going back to all those recollections in the deepest recesses of my memory, a sensation that, who knows why, frightens and gives pleasure at the same time. Like when I heard the sound of the horn coming from the boat indicating its departure, piercing the air, imposing silence on the population. Everything seemed paralyzed. The noise of the horseshoes on the cobblestones, the activity of the stevedores, the raucous flight of the seagulls, the indecisive arabesques of the clouds, the laughter and the tears, letting the deafening sound invade the whole world of things. Only the roaring that regulated the labor of the sugarcane workers and seemed to come from the smoke-filled mouth of the factory's immense smokestack had a power as paralyzing. And when the first moment of stupor had passed, while the white handkerchiefs were being waved at arm's length, the animation timidly resumed. Perched up on my clouds, I saw the ship pull away from the landing stage with deafening rumblings, distance itself from the pier, merge like a grain of sand into the horizon, and then disappear from my sight, leaving me as dismayed as if the love of my life had been taken away on board. In the meantime, the onlookers and escorts had deserted the docks. Only a few dock workers who were finishing up their showers with the help of a rubber hose remained. Having just arrived, the fried fish vendors were unpacking their paraphernalia, setting up their stalls and starting in turn their workday. Soon thereafter, the few street lights which the city had recently provided to replace the oil lamps went on, delivering the streets to a mob of people whose habits were unknown to me at my young age. Executed with habits detachment, those maneuvers brought me abruptly back down to earth. It was time to take to my heels and make my way back home. Returning, I brought with my facial expression all the elsewhere suggested by the ship's departure. Then Hermanos shot me an angry glance. You'll see, you'll end up disappearing into your dreams, you little idiot, and no one will ever be able to bring you back. Only Diogen had the gift of driving me crazy when he felt like it. All he had to do was say to me, "A new boat has arrived at port, one you have never seen." And without worrying about the presence or the absence of Mama Lorvana, I would fly off like an arrow, beating even the speed of the wind. Generally, once on the spot, I would realize that it was an old cargo ship that a simple glance from the top of the hill would have enabled me to identify. And while I was returning on the sly, completely out of breath because of my arrow-like round trip, he would call out to me while bursting out laughing, "Did you see the new boat?" Even though I'd sworn to myself that he would never catch me again, my curiosity and his deceit won out over my resolution every time. And the one time I succeeded in not giving in, it was raining cats and dogs that day, so I had a good pretext for not rushing outside needlessly before returning as drenched as a duck. I lost the chance to admire an exact replica of the Titanic that was anchored up in the bay. It was the property of a German multimillionaire who was doing a port-to-port around the world tour. Since then, scarcely had Diogen uttered his new boat than I would fly off the handle. That's how I inherited the nickname that people here would transform into new boat. In time, my grandson Jonas had taken over from my two brothers, pulling me out of my daydreaming with a, "What are you dreaming about again, Granny?" Luckily, God gave him to me, that one. So that's the first chapter of Granny's story. I'm reading 3 sections from her. The second one is called The Massacre of 1937. Morris just made a reference to it. 1937 is one of the most famous historical dates in Haitian history, infamous, maybe I should say, because of the Trujillo-orchestrated massacre of Haitians, and those issues are still going on, Morris just told me, and George. Some of you have read about it from Danticat's The Farming of Bones. That's, I think, the novel that made this incident famous in the States. Rita Dove wrote a poem called Parsley that you might be familiar with. Also about the same topic, and as you know, the massacre of 1937 is sometimes known as the Parsley Massacre, thus she plays on that in her poem. So we have Granny again now looking back to an event in her youth. She's 8 years old at the time, and recounting, in this case, she's in the midst of a chase. She's being chased by Dominican soldiers. Sorry. From a trot, we shifted to a gallop, but the more we advanced, the closer the barking was getting to us. I crossed my fingers furiously until I felt the pain lacerate my bones. I hoped that perhaps the breeze had played a trick on me, a dirty trick. Unfortunately, it wasn't an auditory illusion. They were really there. Their barking was so close that we crossed a field of elang without me paying any attention to it. In other circumstances, I would have had the whole family stop. Then I would have plunged my nose into the intoxicating perfume, and I became giddy from it. From that point on, my father ran more than he walked. His feet barely touched the ground. I clung to his shoulder to regulate the bouncing of my head, or at times to avoid falling off. Mama Lorvana was moaning all the while, eating up the kilometers with the bearing of a marathon runner. The same for Luciana, her hand in Pétion's. The boys moved forward with a determined pace, as if they knew the route to take by heart, and the yelping of our heels, pouring out their hot breath on our calves, the cries of other groups who'd left at the same time as us, and who will never again hear the sound of falling rain, the growling of the dogs, the muted sound of boots. Once again, that injunction embedded in my memory, "Mátalo," kill him. The ripping of our clothes to escape from brambles, one of which slashes my face. I still have the scar. With all my 8 years, I clench my teeth so as not to scream, so that they won't find out where I am, just like I tighten my buttocks so I won't lose control there on my father's chest. My intestines are in a vicious struggle with the runs. I can't control my bladder anymore, which overflows in short bursts. I would suffer from incontinence for a long time afterward, a habit abandoned when I started nursery school. And Antonio, bedwetter, aren't you ashamed, a big beanpole like you? He had already forgotten Antonio, or perhaps he didn't see the link to our trip. All the better for him. Perched up on my papa's shoulder, I am as out of breath as the others. My throat is dry, like a desert of stones. My chest is on fire. It would take an entire river to quench my thirst, but I don't have time to think about it. The barking, there, right behind us. Is it the wind or real proximity? I imagine the hounds fleshy and powerful like horses. They stick their paws on our backs and tear us apart, like my experienced teeth do with stalks of sugar cane, just like those that are rising up in front of us, one pressed tightly against the other, forming a compact field. We rush in without heeding the leaves. Like sharpened machetes, their cutting edges dig into our skin. Our bodies are numb to all pain other than to the effort deployed at preventing our pursuers from catching up with us. Just ahead, other groups are trying to escape in the confusion of an army in retreat. Some people can't continue. Lungs about to explode, they let themselves fall to the ground, uttering Ave Marias and Our Fathers. In a sudden silence, a bullet pierces the air. The prolongations of the noise in a lingering sound. The running stops for an instant before starting up again in the same chaos. The shock of whining, of tears, mine and those of Luciana, those of others as well, the screaming, the barking, which later I would hear all night long each time I'd close my eyes. Suddenly, the yapping stopped. Rather, it became distant, almost muffled. If it weren't for the circumstances, one could readily feel as if in a dream. Had we lost our executioners? Had they abandoned the chase? Now that there couldn't be a single one of us left in their country, what else could they want? The explanation wasn't long in coming. We continued to advance with the same resolve. We had to gain more and more ground on them, to not stop until we crossed the Massacre River. The more progress we made, with the stride that all the athletes that are talked about so much today would envy, the hotter we got. The heat was unbearable, inexplicable, especially so early in the morning. It had to be 8, 9 o'clock. The sun was still hesitating between a caress and a bite. Of course we provided the effort. Fear was lodged in our stomachs, our bodies swimming in sweat, a sweat that completely obscured our vision. And that heat. And until we catch sight of the thick smoke that is rising straight up toward the sky. The cane field is in flames. The fire is encircling us. We're caught in the trap. We'll be roasted alive. We're suffocating. A cacophony of sneezes. Some rush out, hands above their heads. The bullets crackle, crisp salvos, accompanied by horrified cries. The wind is blowing, fanning the flames. They roar, "Voop! Voop! Voop!" Delicious onomatopoeia. The sizzling of burning sugarcane. Wounded, some are trying to return to their point of departure. In their eyes, the desire to confront the afterlife in the midst of their own, as if their presence could render the passage easier. But the flames don't allow the realization of their last request. Incapable of resisting, others leave. The rifles again. Their blasts are followed by a brief silence. As the circle of fire closes up around us, the group gets smaller and smaller. Still others attempt a new sortie in the hope, no doubt, of a better destiny than their predecessors, or a less brutal face-to-face with the other shore. With the 1 gallon of water at our disposal, my father has the good idea of dampening bits of cloth, which we wear over our noses in order to breathe. A paltry solution. What solution could Papa invent when in a couple of minutes tongues of fire will be licking our arms, our legs, our faces? A song surges up from the chest of an old woman. You wonder how she could have run this far. It was picked up in unison by the elders. Closer to you, my God, closer to you. That melody accompanies me often these days. It came like an illumination. I see clearly Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego in the burning fire. I forget that behind the curtain of smoke and fire there are dozens of Nebuchadnezzar's soldiers waiting for us, rifle in hand, ready to grab us like ortolans. I close my eyes. I close my eyes. I close my eyes with all the energy of my young age. And I wait. It was at that moment, when we didn't have any other choice but to confront our destiny, that the rain came. Hard, violent even. in vertical sheets mixed with hail, a rain close to hurricanes, and it wasn't even the season. Some people will surely say that the sky was already overcast and that it hadn't realized it, and that I hadn't realized it, and that it would have been impossible to pay attention to such details given the circumstances. Me, I respond, evil to whoever doubts the divine mercy of Christ. The shower would last half a day. We took advantage of the first breach that opened up in the curtain of fire to set off on a new race. Nothing could stop us, neither the rain that was blinding us nor the mud that was starting to form, making the ground slippery. Antonio, Pétion, and Diogen took turns carrying Luciana, passing her back and forth while they were running. We were no longer very far from our native soil, with a bit of luck. The respite, however, didn't last long. Several hundred yards from the Massacre River, a barrier of armed men as numerous as the grains of sand from the ocean was forming. It wasn't enough to stop us. We were determined not to be pushed around anymore, so we charged. A horde of men and women ready to do anything to get to the river, their salvation. Some bodies slumped down. The old woman who sang is among us. Trampled, she continues to sing, "Closer to you, my God, closer to you." Those of our executioners who didn't make way to let us through are crushed. The others resume the attack and the chase. The bullets whistle at our back. Some of us fall. The most able-bodied pick them up. Others remain on the ground. We have to reach the river. The river. I think that this time my intestines gave way. The dogs again, they're barking. The water is in front of us, a few steps away. My vision is getting blurred because of the fatigue, perhaps, from the sweat and the tears, for sure. I won't hear the dogs restrained by their masters, preventing them from jumping into the water, yapping with rage, nor Diogen screaming when he got hit by a machete on his left leg. I won't see my family cross the river, red with blood, and continue to run upon entering the town. I won't understand how we're able to reach our old neighborhood along the wharf to start all over again at zero. I'll continue to pretend that Diogen has his two legs and to speak to Hermanos as if he were present. The third section from Granny's story is more anchored in her past, in her present. And here she's reflecting on her memory. And Dalembert conceives her as she has a specific role in this text. I think I won't relate it, but I think it's pretty obvious as the text proceeds. So I'm going to continue. Excuse me, I'm kind of getting... It's the heat, and, so far I haven't felt vertical sheets of rain, so here we go. Granny, the guardian of memory. This is the last text of her section. A long time later, when I had had to move to another neighborhood, the boats were already no longer used for anything except to transport merchandise and people who were leaving on cruises or who were coming from nowhere, filled with tourists ready to marvel at the slightest trinket. In any case, my steps had trouble making it to the wharf's guardrails, where the passers-by, seeing me deeply absorbed in the contemplation of the ships, took me for an old-fashioned romantic, a deranged woman, hoping for the return of a lover who'd left light years ago. It's not only in books and at the movies that one sees such fables. And as it's been ages since I've cared anything about those stories, and it's been ages since I've cared anything about those stories involving men. By a stroke of good fortune, the new house that I'm still living in with Jonas is located right next to the airport that serves domestic flights. Formerly, early in the morning, using the pretext of going to get some sun, I would spend hours watching the airplanes come to warm up at the end of the runway before taking off in a noise of steel, carrying away my stare and my imagination. For, in spite of the time that had elapsed, I still hadn't rid myself of my dreams of elsewhere, like a toy that you play with endlessly. And I would watch those monsters elevate into the air, raise their crests, proud like roosters after making love, turn over on their right wing, feigning a spin, then straighten nimbly up to lose themselves in the clouds. But despite the prowess they demonstrated, in the clouds. In flying and in the clouds and in not falling again after takeoff, in my mind, they hadn't replaced the boats, which have that capacity to take up the rhythm of the waters in order to advance, sometimes even against their furor. Perhaps the air doesn't have the same effect on me as the liquid immensity, and if I too had had to leave, I would have chosen a boat, partly so as not to distance myself all at once from my city. All things considered, the only times that those machines succeeded in extracting a cry of admiration from me was when they would pirouette above the ocean, go into a nosedive as if they were going to plunge into the water for good, before elevating their steel frames and setting off again straight ahead. Imagine one of them, would to God that it doesn't, crashing into the water with all those people inside and the windows closed. What an atrocious death that would be. After those acrobatics, I would stay for hours, my eyes riveted on the horizon, if I didn't have to finish a dress for a demanding client, that is, trying to relate the idle fancies of an old lady to those of my youth, until Jonas, the little snoop, pops up and calls out to me, "Granny, what are you dreaming about yet again?" What do I say to him? That I'm trying to reassemble my dreams and my recollections, which henceforth form only one single faded bouquet? That it's way too late to cross the ocean? My legs, those pillars of Hercules, won't support me anymore. I wouldn't take 2 steps before I'd collapse. In any case, I don't want to anymore. My heart isn't in it. With the passing of time, I've seen so many people leave, very few have returned to their point of departure. Those who've tried weren't long in rediscovering the mystery left back there. Who has seen water return to its source before? Today, people leave early and earlier. The neighborhood is losing its young people like a necklace, its pearls. And me, I'm staying here, guardian of a temple whose walls, because of their cracking, will end up collapsing like me, disappearing into my dreams. I'm still waiting for my brother's prediction to come true, for good. And while I stare at the horizon like that, I'm only trying to recall the name, the face, the voice, the gait, and sometimes the history of those who have gone. They have been, or are they still living? The pages, the unfinished chapters of my life. Who will remember them when I'm no longer here? Recently, it's as if a virus had swept down on the city, hitting families in turn, not sparing even the most well-off. Not a month goes by, not even a week, without someone, their face misty with bittersweet tears, coming up and greeting me. "God has listened to our prayers, grandmother. The departure is set for this afternoon." For him and those close to him, even his enemies with whom he's gladly reconciled the day of his departure, leaving is always good news, even if he is unaware of what is waiting for him over there. Oh, his happiness is not difficult to understand when you've seen him hang out on the sidewalk the whole blessed day, trying to kill time, which refuses to die. I've watched all the young people grow up as if they were my own grandsons. I spend entire days holding back my tears, wishing, "Good luck, my son, good luck, my daughter. I will pray for you. May God guide your steps in the unknown snow." And I shake their hands or I embrace them. That's according to the degree of intimacy that connects us. How does one swim against the current and play the killjoy? Except, of course, when it's a question of an older man or an older woman who has already bought and sold everything life has to offer and turns up in front of you, dolled up like a first communion cake, twiddling her thumbs without knowing where to start, and ends up confessing to you, "I'm going to see my daughter, neighbor. Do you remember her? The one who got married to a citizen over there. I showed you the wedding pictures." Even if I remember, I always act like the one who doesn't remember anything. With age, you know, my good friend, if I'm not careful, I'll end up forgetting my name. Since frequently I don't have any choice, I accept the kiss of Judas, knowing full well that the fawning hypocrite will never return. At times, though, I've had to invent a case of the flu, coughing as if my thorax was about to detach, so I didn't have to feel her lips, enhanced with a set of false teeth bought for the occasion, on my cheeks. It's better not to arrive with a bad virus in the land of the whites, neighbor. Those heartless people are capable of putting you back on the airplane only for that and sending you home. I drive the point home intentionally, and eye the shameless woman scornfully as soon as her back is turned. There is, after all, a time when you have to know how to send someone packing and not to be taken for a flight attendant, no? Some of the young people swear that they'll write to me at Christmas or at New Year's. A few of them will keep their promise. The others have perhaps passed under the tree of oblivion. Generally around Easter, while I'm cooling on the veranda with my eyes half closed, the mailman wakes me up with a toot of his horn from atop his moped, and shortly thereafter my servant leaves in my hands an envelope or a postcard that my tired eyes will decipher several hours later. Sometimes I remember exact traits of my correspondent, the circumstances of their departure even. Sometimes I try in vain to bring back the name itself from the mist of my memory. Then I bore, I rummage day and night until I remember it. During the day, I keep staring at the horizon. Then people, especially Jonas, think I'm not all there. And yet, I'm there, as real as the Earth's rotation. I want to say that I'm not as far away as that, except in time, which rebels against my brain. At night, my eyes merge with the shadows that engulf the room. I recite a rosary one by one for those sons, those godchildren, those sisters, those friends that I will never see again, while the ocean comes making waves in my head, diverting me towards times that are not those of this city, nor of this world, of this earth. Even if I hold it back, put up dams, it always ends up getting the better of them, like the sandcastles of our childhood. Sometimes for weeks at a time, it lets me pile up stone upon stone, weave my memory, deftly recover the unfastened snares before spitefully pouncing on my stubbornness. Then I imagine the neighborhood, the city, anemic, emptied of its youth, of its blood. Who will sing the wake of the dead when they are all gone? Who, besides my little Jonas, will strew flowers on my final resting place? I will never know why people get up one morning, choose to close the door, and to wander far from their native land, leaving behind them relatives, friends, the smell of a neighborhood, without knowing what difficulties they run to over there. I'll really never understand. I mean, without all those pretexts that you invent or that others, that life provide. I'm harsh, aren't I? It's my deepest held feeling, though. Without a doubt, the real reason for all that is the fear of the great departure, the desire to take advantage of one's stay on earth before the last sound of the bell inviting us to leave for the other shore. In the beginning, there was God moving above the waters. In the beginning, there was the ocean. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have included 3 passages from part 1. But you'll be happy to know things change a bit now. The second section is called The City. It's between the 2 first-person narrators. So it has an omniscient narrator. And there are several ways that you can conceive the city. I won't say very much about it again. For one, it's Port-au-Prince, for sure. But it's also a metaphor for the country. So in this section, yes, there's a third-person narrator, but the person followed is Jonas. And so the narrator is following Jonas move into the realm of a city that he's never explored before, i.e., what can I say, a realm extra-familial, and this is what he discovers. The city. Jonas hadn't set foot in that part of the city for ages. None of his friends or relatives lived there. The cultural centers he used to go to had moved. Following the tracks of that student who had been absent from his classes for 2 weeks, he wound up there again. Having asked at least a half dozen people, he was able to find the house he was looking for. A single room where a woman, embarrassed, receives him. The student's mother Hasn't seen him for several days. She doesn't know he's not the only one of her children who has left without coming back. She put everything in God's hands. Jonas left the interview disappointed. What was he hoping for from that brief conversation with a woman whose face was evidence of her rough life? As he leaves, he casts a last glance back at the house. It's already a miracle, he says to himself, that his student has been able to hold out for this long. The area offers the same state of desolation as the little house. No roads anywhere, not even space enough to turn around. Makeshift shops spread out on a bit of wood about the size of the palms of your hand. 2 or 3 articles, no more, small bottles of milk or carbonated beverages, canned food, whose labels between the dirt and the rust can't be deciphered anymore. 1 or 2 small packs of cigarettes sold individually that constitute the main part of the vendor's inventory. Bits of hardened bread. Has anyone ever haggled over them with him? Seated behind the display, a woman under the protection of a wide straw hat stretches out her hand, struggles with the wrapping to extract the piece of candy, brings it to her mouth, and sucks vigorously. The young man lowers his head. He doesn't dare look into people's eyes, as if he were responsible for their distress. Right next to her, young street urchins swoop down on the windows of cars stopped in traffic jams with waxy rags that make them dirtier. Some drivers chase them away. Others accept a service executed in the twinkling of an eye. They extend a supplicating hand while looking away, embarrassed. The driver drops the coin into a palm, avoiding contact with the filthy hand. Others hit the road looking to survive. A job as a porter, getting a car out of the mud, sex earlier and earlier, renting your ass to a local or a tourist while closing your eyes hard and clenching your teeth, as long as it allows you to eat afterwards and to buy yourself a patch of land in paradise. Artificial. With difficulty, Jonas makes his way in the midst of all those people. He's sweating like the others. The sun is burning his head. The desire to vomit constricts his chest. The city is bustling under the sun's fire. The city rises and falls, sweats, labors, stays congested from morning till night. The city, if you can call it that, this morass where millions of humans live together and 3 times as many pigs, all wallowing in the shit, one on top of the other, and that desire to vomit for Christ's sake that never comes to pass. He reels. His gait wavers. Farther away, the young man sees the cardboard huts clinging to the side of mountains in the slightest nooks and crannies. They have cropped up with a disconcerting rapidity, like weeds in one night, an afternoon. Certain families take turns sleeping there amid the rats and the rubbish, and the pigs too, who've invaded the city, black ones, crossbreeds, multicolored ones, their snouts lost under the mounds of debris. They scatter them into trails of stench along the roads. They cross like divas, followed by a whole multitude of swine swaying their nonchalant fat as if the entire world were watching them pass. In some countries, it's the cow, a sacred animal, that stops traffic. In others, the eagle deploys its talons as a symbol of power. Elsewhere, the condor passes by in majestic flight. Here, it's the pigs that strut around, as an omen of the shit the city was destined to become. They are everywhere, a perfect imitation of the space that welcomed them, teeming with mud and pestilence, on the main road, on the side roads, the dirt roads, the shortcuts, the fronts of houses. The first one to greet guests at the exit of the airport and welcome them to Shitsville. You see them inside the central cemetery, gorging themselves on the corpses that the rain and the tomb robbers have snatched from the shadows of death. Lost in his thoughts, Jonas bumps into a small group of people gathered right in the middle of the street. There are 20 or 30 of them, but it seems as if there were thousands. They form a circle of hate around the body curled up on the ground, on the asphalt buckling under the midday heat. The sun is at its zenith. Their shadows merged under their feet in a shifting, deformed ball. resemble the evil spirits that have taken possession of their heads. Their expressions reveal something that no longer belongs to the human race. Their eyes send out strange sparks. They scream, gesticulate, each one brandishing a different weapon, a piece of wood, an old knife, a chipped bottleneck, unearthed who knows where, still covered with mud, an enormous stone generating spasmodic discharges in the frail arms that hold it above a head with prominent veins. In a few seconds, it'll smash against the head. It's biding its time. The body is curled up in a fetal position. The arms are crossed over the chest, the hands gripping the shoulders as if seeking protection from the cold. The knees are almost touching the chin. He doesn't have any expression in his eyes anymore. Does he see the crowd demanding his sacrifice? Is he still thinking? Perhaps he's reviewing his life, not that different than that of his executioners. Then he says to himself that death is the best gift they could offer him. Perhaps he's already on the other side, floating in the other world, celebrating his reunion with the spirit of his childhood, the shades of his ancestors. He's no longer there in any case, not in the middle of their screaming, of their madness that is demanding a scapegoat to exorcise their misery and their hunger, to saw off their giant rat's teeth that gnaw away at hope, to ward off the anguish of living, hoping that, at the end of the sacrifice, a new sun will rise. Powerless, Jonas witnesses the ceremony. He'd like to intervene, but what would he say? He'd only be offering them a new lamb. He knows that. Shaken by imperceptible convulsive movements, the body is only allowed to stiffen for brief intervals. In tatters, his t-shirt reveals a chest spattered with blood. A swollen eyeball is hanging out of its socket, the result of the blows received while his executioners would drag him along the ground. His lips form a puffy hole with the rest of his face. Slaps like there's no tomorrow. A woman threw the contents of a chamber pot in his face. Laughing, a child let fly with a kick to his nose. His nostrils pissed blood. Others pummeled his ribs with billy clubs. As a result, they became numb. In the end, people were beating him, and he didn't feel anything anymore. Who is he? No one knows. A werewolf that gorges itself on the blood of newborn babies? No, he's one of those bourgeois that squeeze people like a lemon. An adulterous woman? Shaken by twitches arriving at regular intervals, the body attempts to lift its head. A boot pins its neck to the ground. The sound of the skull hitting the asphalt is heard. The face is completely disfigured. The next section, even though I don't want to intervene, I have to say a word or two about it. This text has two narratives. It has a primary narrative, which is a departure, and a secondary narrative, which is an arrival. I call the secondary narrative a counter-narrative. And you can imagine that the secondary narrative has a point of departure in Africa. And it takes place at a different time period, i.e. 300 years previously. So we have then, as there is the main narrative, which is the story of a departure, I think that will become clear when I finish, there's a secondary narrative tracing an arrival. And the other interesting thing to point out about the secondary narrative is that it's written in a completely different style. If you've looked at the text, you might know. It has no capital letters and no punctuation, and the language is very condensed and very poetic. Now, I asked Dalembert a little bit about this, how he did it, and if he, whatever. He said he wrote it like that, without extracting anything. And he calls these passages pause poétique, which are poetic pause poétique, poetic pauses, thank you. Perhaps because there's no punctuation, they're also written in a very condensed language, and I have to say also that Dalembert was a poet before he became a novelist, so it's not surprising that you probably noticed that he likes to use a lot of similes and metaphors. So I think I've said what I have to say about these passages. I should, besides patting your patience on the back, say that these passages, of which I'll read 5, are very short. So I gave them, again, artificial titles. And they're also related to the senses, as number 1 and 4 will indicate. The 1 is called sounds. Number 4 is called odor. And you can see how the author tries to, transmit the experience of the middle passage through these poses poétiques. Sounds. The waves. You don't see them. You feel them. Hear them recede to fill their lungs with water, charging at full speed against the hull of the big boat. Bong! They retreat again, calm, flat, as if they had definitively gone. Cruel illusion. Bong! Bong, bong, bong! Infernal cadence. Dozens of them, hundreds of them, thousands of them assault the big boat, shaken like a walnut shell. They don't stop. They take turns. No respite. You imagine them the height of Kilimanjaro, banging, 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 filled with resentment toward the boats desecrating the sea's flank. This one doesn't even have the time to tilt to one side. 1, 2, several ground swells stand it up. One hits it right in the loins. It sways, reels. Several others right it, lift it up, hold it up in the space between sky and water, let it go. A shock of an unimaginable violence. Above, the noises of voices, orders and counter-orders, the footsteps of sailors running in all directions, the panic of women crying hysterically, the restless dogs baying to the moon. Their yapping makes you shudder. The indifference of the waves that bang, bang, and bang again. Second passage is called The Pacification of Agüe. Here again, I need to say a word or two about Agüe. Agüe is the voodoo Leo who is in charge of the sea and fish. You also see here a reference to Yemaya, who is African, coming from Yoruba culture, and she's the goddess of motherhood. In this particular context, there's a reference to Agüe Tawoyo. And for those of you who know Spanish, Taroyo is a kind of Haitianification of arroyo in Spanish, which means stream or river. So Agüe Tawoyo is the captain of a boat who is in charge of taking the dead to the place of their afterlife, which is in this case Guinea. I think you'll see that perhaps those remarks are helpful. The pacification of Agüe, the sea that one doesn't see, that you feel, that you imagine rough. It bangs with all its weight against the hull. The bodies packed in get jammed more. It slams, they separate. It slams, bangs. She is bad, nasty, angry, vindictive goddess, legs and arms entangled, head to tail, butts, crushed noses, chests, mouths, stifled cries, asphyxia. The big boat pitches, swells. The heart climbs to the mouth, exhales and vomiting without end that mixes with the sweat of fear. The voices step up the laments, evoking marine deities in many languages. Yemaya, Agüe Tawoyo, Loco, Papa. Stop blowing on their animosity. Reestablish the links of friendship with Agüe. Links like the beads of water, the sea that you feel, drags the bodies one on top of the other, tinkling of chains, bodies elevated very high, like wisps of defeat and of suffering that fall, suddenly allowing the sea to calm down. The gods have made peace. The bodies end up in their initial spot, in the same sausaging. Some won't move anymore. The next visit of a man from above, they'll be thrown overboard. Dreams. Now the big boat is gliding over a calm sea. Nothing is troubling sleep in the darkness of steerage. Neither the noise of the wind in the sails, nor the curved swells of the backwash that come, indicating the exertion of the prow cleaving its way through the aquatic mass. On the bridge, no longer any noise of steps bringing nightmares to sleep, except the trip toward the beyond the knowledge of the world. The boat is sinking. The waves have disappeared, left to rest from their efforts in the bowels of the marine immensity, harassing other boats toward other shores. And the livestock is sleeping, dreaming of the shores left behind, of initiation rites to life, of dances with levitation around the fire, tracking prey in the heart of the forest, contact of hands on hard breasts amidst the clanking of chains. The livestock sleeps while the big boat continues its journey toward the unknown. It dreams that it never wakes up. Odor. The lack of air, the suffocation, the odor of vomit mixed with the flatulence that escapes from intestines, with fetid breasts, with the foul smell of rotten cod, from armpits and crotches, from excessive layers of dried sweat on the skin, the mold of bodies, the open mouth seeking breaths of adulterated oxygen, the deterioration of certain pieces of wood merges with the decomposition of dozens of rats' cadavers that heads or aggressive hooves have crushed against the wall, mildewed with rotten fish from the sea, filtering through the interstices. Smells of males and females mix, stuffiness, hold in bursts of odor, spraying the passengers above, invisible smoke that stings the nostrils of those ladies. Animal odor. And finally, the last one of these passages, and I have one more section to go. It's called the Promised Land. A livestock under escort, shoved somehow. How many moons for the trip to the unknown toward nothingness and the negation of the human? Tears furrow some faces, others jump. The sea welcomes them, swimming furiously, backtracking to over there, the route of Alegba. Dogs released, sailors thrown into small boats and rowing, the sailors rowing hard into the flanks of hope, most recovered with hooks planted in the neck, in the small of their backs. The blows of paddles, others, not two or three, sinking straight to the bottom, singing, fettered by their chains, sinking the route of Alegba without having seen the land not promised. Okay, the last section. Let's see if I can find it. Looks like it fell. It's taken from Jonah's story. So finally, he gets to be the narrator. This is really two sections combined. The second section is all dialogue. So it's still another different stylistic take on this text. At one time, I asked myself if Dalembert was trying to be Victor Hugo. I mean, he's doing drama and poetry and romance and okay. This is called Mass Exit Toward the Promised Land. It doesn't need any introduction, but if I could make one more observation, you will pardon me. We left off one of the passages called Promised Land, and now we're bringing up again the Promised Land in this primary narrative. And so Dalembert is always playing off these two narratives, trying to set up verbal links between the two. I think it's really clever. The night of the disappearance, I was awakened by the hammer blows, even more ferocious than usual, brazen like the first time I heard them, louder than the galloping of all the horses that were running through my mind. The house, my bed were shaking, The breaking of glasses flung against each other was probably coming from Granny's old dresser. I sprang out of bed, leapt toward the window, whose shutters I threw open noisily on each side of the wall, and saw a flood of humanity rushing in a disorderly procession. No scene from Carnival, nor from a stadium in delirium, could be compared to it. The entire city was in the street. Men, women, children, with, as all their luggage, a simple suitcase for one, a bundle for another, while others were empty-handed, but they all had the same strange expression on their faces, like a veil of fear and of immense joy at the same time. And that human tide was moving toward the sea. I turned on the radio and swept across the dial, trying to find an explanation. I ran back toward the window. The crowd was still advancing, resolute, indifferent to everything that was going on around it. Some people were chanting, "Thanks, dear God. Look how poverty is over for us." That's a translation from Creole. Rough translation. The others were content with walking, their gaze, like those of zombies, riveted on the horizon. Finally, the radio provided me with several bits of information. The rumor had spread throughout the night that given all the problems that the city was confronting, the neighboring people of Gog-Magog had decided to open their doors to everyone who wanted to emigrate. The principle had just been applied in another island in the region. Think Cuba. The rumor had added that the administrative formalities could be completed over there. No one knew where the news originated, but everyone believed it. The steps resonated with a muffled martial sound. The wall of the house continued to shake. I rubbed my eyes with both hands. Those wanting to leave were arriving from everywhere, invading the airports, taking the ports by storm, boarding the cruise ships and freighters, hopping on the first floating vehicle that came along toward the new promised land. More than one person extemporized as a sailor without any knowledge whatsoever of either a compass or a navigational chart. People were ready to do anything for a place on board, prostitute themselves, sell their family and their soul to the devil, kill by shoving into the water the head of whoever was desperately trying to grab onto an oar, an airplane wing, a propeller that would amputate their two hands as cleanly as a sugarcane mill. Those who didn't find means of locomotion didn't hesitate to throw themselves into the water, saying to themselves that they would end up getting there by swimming. Watching the humans leave, the animals, too, took to the sea. Dogs, cats, and God alone knows, though, how much those creatures are afraid of water. Crocodiles, rats, cockroaches, ladybugs, hummingbirds. Specialists of the Exodus proposed their services at exorbitant rates. The people who didn't move at all were rare. A few rich people, the new masters of the city, foreigners on bad terms with the law in their country, the members of diplomatic delegations, me to watch over Granny, who had vowed that she would never leave this land. She would only leave this land feet first, and the pigs, conscious of the fact that it would be impossible for them to find something better elsewhere. The rumor gave rise to a clash of apocalyptic dimensions that would last an entire week. Tens of thousands of people perished. Boats had capsized, the physically handicapped, those who didn't know how to swim. As the hours and the days passed, the sea, so blue in this corner of the world, took on the color of red blood. Attracted by the feast, sharks arrived from all the oceans of the earth, some rare specimens, unusual in this area: hammerheads, gill sharks, dogfish sharks, poor beagles, mallet heads, sharks from the coast of France, an innumerable variety, some of which sank from having eaten too much. Having gotten wind of the Exodus, foreign journalists showed up in helicopters and hydroplanes from the city on the border, for there was no longer any place in the international airport for a chestnut to land, not even the tip of a wing. Even the dirt runways reserved for the dropping off of cocaine coming from Cali and Medellin welcomed airplanes coming from who knows where that arrived here filled with reporters speaking languages that we had never heard in this area. When the chief of staff decided to react, it was too late. The ordinary soldiers, those without rank, had deserted and gone, inflating the massive number of those leaving. Soldiers from the other side of the mountains were called on for help, and they were fidgeting impatiently, waiting to intervene. They arrived with their billy clubs as long as the extended trunk of an elephant. The government of the Promised Land, in spite of itself, wasn't long in reacting either. It gave the green light to its naval commander, who launched dozens of gunboats filled with soldiers armed to the teeth with orders to shoot on sight. By all means possible, the invaders had to be turned away and the local population reassured, since the presidential election was drawing near. The military, who couldn't have asked for more, took advantage of the situation to unearth some old biological weapons from World War I that were stagnating in steel vats dozens of meters underground, and to test others differently than by computer simulation or in the desert. The warships were aligned in international waters halfway to the Promised Land in a triple curtain of steel, with their fire-breathing muzzles pointed at the beachhead of those dreaming of El Dorado. And without warning, they fired on the precarious vessels while airplanes buzzed right over them and covered them with layers of gas, but they continued to advance. In fact, the first ones hit paved the way for those behind. During maneuvers, while the row of warships was retreating to make their way for another one to take its place, men and women who had only one arm left or one eye succeeded in breaking through the Iron Curtain, all the more so since the death machine started running short of munitions. And while they were stocking up again, millions of others, crippled by destiny, were able to reach the forbidden shores. Moved by such determination and not feeling menaced in any way by those poor wretches armed only with their desire to live, the men and women of the Promised Land organized more pleasant welcoming committees to go to meet them, snatching them from the soldiers who had come to welcome them as well. They established networks of generosity, pompously baptized a planet for everyone. Those committees saw to it that the new arrivals were dispersed all over the place so as to shield them from the investigations that, there too, weren't long in coming. The politicians called on the population to denounce every individual suspected of harboring an invader. Thus, the most active members of the association found themselves behind bars, hit with prison sentences for life for the crime of high treason against state security. Faced with the magnitude of the exodus and the means put into place by the Promised Land to counter it, the Emergency Council of the highest court of the planet met and decreed at the end of 3 days and 3 nights of extravagant discourse that every nation has the right to defend its borders. The Human Rights Defense Committees, wanting to gain time and delay the deportation orders, argued that the alleged invaders hadn't arrived at the borders of the Promised Land. The nationalists retorted that one had to nip evil in the bud. The governments of other Promised Lands, from the region as well as from outside of it, sent reinforcements to the scene in order to aid the nations they had friendly relations with. One shouldn't create a precedent nor disrupt the status quo in the world. 7 days and 7 nights which saw the sea tremble on its axes, overflow, and invade the critics along the cities along the border. 7 days at the end of which the steel curtains, which had multiplied like jellyfish, were successful in containing the flood of invaders, leaving tens of thousands of cadavers. The survivors were accompanied back to their shores of origin. Then several steel barriers composed of as many warships were deployed along the city's coastline. While I was witnessing those maneuvers, broadcast live by a satellite TV station, Granny passed out, holding her chest in her bony hands, her mouth open, as if she couldn't breathe anymore. Each time she caught her breath again, it was to repeat like a broken record, "I had to see that, too. I had to see that, too. I had to see that, too." Seeing Granny choke, I was petrified before I finally decided to react, to run into the kitchen and bring back a jar of cold water, which I threw in her face full force. Nothing happened. Then I wanted to air out the living room. I opened all the exits. In search of air, I opened all the exits. I turned the fan on full blast and directed it toward Granny, who didn't stop, gasping for breath. Her chest was rising and falling at a frenetic pace. Outside, carried along by the blows of the hammers that were increasing in volume, people were marching resolutely in the direction of the sea. The last section is very short. I told you it was a dialogue. It's called Jonah's Decision. In my opinion, You're supposed to read this. I mean, there are two ways of reading it, I suppose, but I think you're supposed to read this as a debate inside of Jonah's mind as he assimilates all the various experiences that he's been exposed to throughout the novel. And so it goes pretty fast. Occasionally, it might not be clear who's speaking, but I think the words make pretty clear the context. So thank you for your patience. I will bring this to a conclusion. Jonas will decide something. This city is screwed. That's not true. Where do you see the hope? In the eyes of people. Me, I see them pallid, the stares of zombies. They will wake up one day. When? I'm not a seer. How do you wake them? You give them salt to eat. There isn't any anywhere. Someone will go looking for it. Where? I don't know. There must be some somewhere. At the bottom of their hearts. They're dried out. Somewhere else then. Who will get it? Who will bring it back to us? A Messiah. Do you still believe in that? In the coming of Christ or in non-development? Both. I don't believe in that anymore. In what? In Messiahs. Why? They're badly disguised devils. And the development of the city? I'm an agnostic. What's the connection? It means that I have my doubts. You have to leave, my friend. Go away. Put the ocean between you and all this shit. You know full well all that follows you wherever you go. Evil spells don't cross water. Who said anything to you about evil spells? This land has rotten luck. You have to release its mystical powers, release it from the spell. I have never dealt in mysticism. What do you propose? I'm taking off. We haven't said our last word yet. We've said too much about it. We have a glorious past. That's of no interest. Only the present and the future count. Stay. No, we need you. To do what? What a question. You graduated from École Normale Supérieure. That's past history. The professors earn low wages teaching famished students. They earn just enough to feed themselves and dress decently, and even that by multiplying their course hours, by dispatching their corrections like a poorly paid math of Thanksgiving. Not all of them. The rest are of no importance. Why then? They're bourgeois. So, you have to take into account still. They're not from here. Who said that? Me. Why? Their umbilical cords were cut with a foreign passport. What's the problem? They're from elsewhere. Not all of them. It's not my problem. Are you going to leave the city to the whites? It's not a city. What is it? A place of no importance, and not even a pig pen. And why are there the whites? We're all whites when in terms of power. And besides, I don't know anything about it. There's oil. They can take it and bathe in it. They'll become like us. Rare ore. I don't give a damn. Precious stones. They can eat them and let them exit through their asshole. I'm leaving. Do you really want to leave? Yes. Why then? You people are mediocre. Us. I don't want to be a part of you any longer. I leave you to wallow, to marinate in your shit. Being abroad won't change anything. You never know. There's no vaccine against it. I don't give a damn. Things aren't necessarily better over there. It's here that things aren't good. How will you manage then? At least I'll inhale different air. Don't go. I'm out of here.